See all of your faces this morning. Happy New Year, Aaron. A couple of announcements for you. If you are new here, a good way to find some information about our church is through our app, which you can download for free on your app store. Just search Union Chapel Vancouver, and it will pop up. It's got good information on it. It's got upcoming events, past sermons that you can listen to, and a kind of a Bible reading app in there. There's also a contact card. So if you're new, we're not filling out like new visitor cards anymore. We're all fancy with technology, so we invite you to fill out that card. Let us know that you're here. Introduce yourself. We'd love to connect with you and help you find ways to meaningfully connect. Also, last week was different in that we chose to worship at home last week, and I was here on Sunday morning putting up some signs just as reminders, like, hey, we're worshiping at home this morning, and to which I had the pleasure of greeting about 5 or 6 of you and your families. I realized we want to grow in our ability to communicate, but also I wanted to help you and direct you to a couple of things: our app, our website, and then also our Instagram feed is getting a lot of attention these days in terms of from our staff and communicating regularly. So you would have seen a number of stories and posts on those details kind of helping you out. So I want to encourage you, if you haven't done that, it's just UC Vancouver on Instagram is our handle, so you can check that out. A couple things coming down the line. A couple things I'm excited about. First, Thursday the 16th, we're going to be hosting Say Yes, which is a one-man show by Scott Erickson, who some of you may know. This is our second time hosting Say Yes, so I know a good chunk of you have seen this before, but it's hard to describe. Scott's a visual artist, he's a painter, he's a graphic designer, but he's also a really talented storyteller / stand-up comedian, I would say. He's got a little bit of that in him as well. And this is a night that's really a discussion around the idea of giving up and depression and suicide. And while if I say those words and you tune out, I would say there's something here really for everyone at every level. So I want to encourage you to come. It's a great night of him just engaging around this topic, this idea that we often float to these darker thoughts of wanting to give up, and what do we do in the face of that? I would say it's haunted with Jesus and the gospel, but it isn't an outright like gospel presentation or something that's feels real churchy. So it's a great opportunity, I would say, to invite friends and non-believers. And so I think it's something worthwhile. It is $12. I promise you, it's very, very much worth your time. So that's going to be Thursday the 16th up in the annex. Some reason the bulletin says Friday, January 25th. I'm just now seeing that, so sorry. It is Thursday the 16th, yes. So make note of that. Our winter hospitality overflow is coming up real quick, and this is just something we do every year to staff the cold weather shelter for families that is at St. Andrew's Lutheran Church every year, and we staff it for an entire week. So this is just kind of a save the date. That's going to be over Valentine's week, and so if you want a special date, you can sign up on that Friday for like serving our homeless community together. So there are a whole bunch of shifts and more information coming your way on that, but just want to direct you to that. The last thing I want to draw attention to is just this new little portion in our bulletin. I know sometimes you just don't see things here because it feels the same every week from week to week, but our elders communicated to you a number of weeks ago about some needs that we had financially, and want to let you know that we ended the year in a really great space. So I wanted to thank you for your generosity. Yeah. I wanted to thank you for your generosity in giving to what God is doing here. And part of the commitment that our elder team made as well was to just more regular communication. So this is something that's going to stay in the bulletin, this little financial update where you'll be able to see where we're at in regards to the current month and where we're we're at in regards to the year in terms of giving to budget. So if you ever have questions about any of this information, you're welcome to ask anyone on our elder team. So thanks. I think that's all I have in light of that. Would you pray with me for our offering together? Gracious Father, all that we have is yours. Teach us to follow you by this glad practice of giving, that we might live with open hands and grateful hearts, finding joy in each opportunity you give us to invest in the work of your kingdom. Amen. It's amazing how quickly we move on from Christmas. It's just this big push, I feel like, to get there. Had the pleasure of burning my Christmas tree yesterday in my fire pit, which I don't know if I'm allowed to do or not, but I did it. And I think my wife posted the picture on Facebook, and then Molly commented just with that, with a GIF from that scene of the Tom Hanks, what is the Castaway? Thank you, where he's like, I have made fire. Because that was very much my posture in the picture that my wife took. And as this flame was like soaring above my head. And it's the first time that I really had this thought of like, we keep this thing in our house? Like, we are crazy to keep this thing. It's explosive. It was so, well, I should probably water my tree. That'd be a good start. But it was so dry. It was literally like exploding. The branches were just exploding. So, yeah, we do that every year. And but yesterday was our day for kind of clearing out and kind of entering into a new season. And, you know, we move so quickly from the season. But the church has traditionally really spent some time in the birth narrative of Jesus, and this is where the concept of the 12 days of Christmas comes from. And the church really takes some time in the beginning of the year to continue to celebrate Christmas, and part of that is that they revisit stories that are part of the birth narrative. And so last week, I realized we were a little ahead of the game liturgically, but we were as families in our homes reflecting on the passage around the Magi. And this week I want to go to really the last story that appears as a part of the birth narratives, although Jesus is a little bit more grown up at this space. It's funny, we always think like birth and then it just jumps right into Jesus' ministry. But Luke gives us this funny little story that lands in chapter 2 that is about Jesus and Mary and Joseph kind of misplacing Jesus. And so that's where I want to be this morning. Luke chapter 2, verses 41 through 52 is where we're going to be if you've got your Bibles or if you want to follow along. And I'm titling this sermon on losing and finding Jesus. Felt like a fitting place to start. So we're going to talk about what does it mean to lose and find Jesus again. So let's jump right in. Verse 41. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. And when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem, searching for him. After 3 days, they found him. We'll just pause right here. We're going to keep going in a second, but we'll just pause right here. I'm guessing you know the feeling of what it's like to lose something important. The day after Christmas, I realized that I lost my wallet, which to any of you who know me are like, yeah, that's not surprising, because I'm always losing things. I'm losing my wallet, my passport on occasion, my keys run off, my fancy headphones I left in Thailand, but especially coffee mugs. I just have a way of and the staff knows this well. I'm still missing my favorite coffee mug. Somebody has it, I'm sure. But the first day I lost my wallet, I just wasn't too freaked out about it. I was like, I'm sure it's around here somewhere, and I just checked the usual places. My bedroom, the couch cushions, you always got to check the couch cushions, under the front seat of the car, but it wasn't there. And I went to bed, not overly concerned, but definitely like, that's a bummer. I need to figure out where my wallet was at. And, it's kind of the down days after Christmas. It's not like you're going out and doing anything crazy. You're just hanging at home with the kids. So I'm like, this is fine. The second day just kind of was a little different. I didn't go canceling credit cards or anything like that, although I did check online to make sure there wasn't like suspicious activity. And I called my parents because I'd been at their place over Christmas, and they searched their couch, which is a massive couch. Could have easily gone into that couch. I called the last businesses that I had been to with no luck. And part of my problem was that I just didn't know, I didn't have a small window of time in which I knew that I misplaced it. The window was literally like 24 to plus hours of where it could have gone missing. And there are just so many places. And my wife was like, let's just put the kids down and then you can look for it. And so that's what I did on that second day. I tore the house apart, and I went through bags of wrapping paper and cardboard, and I poked around the garbage can. As it gets worse and worse, as you can't find it, you start going to more extreme places. I called the businesses of the places that I had passed by, thinking, what if my wallet fell out in between me going from a business to the car and somebody just turned it into the closest business. I mean, my mind, I checked my Facebook messages for those randos that can shoot you messages sometimes, and it buries those messages deep. I'm like, is there any stranger that's trying to get a hold of me? And by the end of the night, my mild concern about my wallet had grown into this all-encompassing worry. And finally my wife was like, just give it a rest. Will you just sit down? And I was like, fine, I'll sit down. I'll give up for now. And my mind was still going. I couldn't, even when I went to bed, I couldn't stop thinking about this thing that I'd replaced. And the next morning, I woke up and I walked into the laundry room, and my wife has fancy sweaters that she doesn't dry, in the dryer, and so sometimes she just lays them out to dry. I don't have any sweaters like that. But I kicked this sweater, and whoop, there was my wallet underneath the sweater. And it was excitement and relief all at once, and it was kind of this man, I can't believe that I was so worried about losing my wallet. It was here the whole time, to which my wife gives me this giant eye roll, you've got to be kidding me. I call my family and tell them to stop hunting for it, and I look back at it kind of comically, I can't believe I was that worried and frantic and stressing, right? We all know what it feels like to lose something important, to have no sense of where it's gone. I have never lost one of my children. Not yet. Okay? But I do remember my parents freaking out at a Six Flags once when they lost my brother for about 10 minutes. And that memory is completely burned into my mind. And I've witnessed a lot of other people misplace their children. There's probably nothing scarier than misplacing your. Some of you are laughing because you have a story. And it's just terrifying. Even if you're not the parent and you're observing it, it's absolutely terrifying to see the terror and anxiety that ensues. And the parent is completely out of control, right? Almost always, they're completely out of control. They've lost their ability to keep everything under wraps, right? It's just, everything is out there. And it's shock, panic, fear, anxiety, and a huge surge of adrenaline, all at once. And so when we set ourselves in this story just for a minute, you can't help but feel a little bit of that frantic energy that Mary and Joseph are feeling in this story. Jesus is not a toddler, right? He's 12 years old. But he's kind of in this weird space. He's not a child, he's not a man. If you have a 12-year-old, you probably know what this is like, having somebody in your home like that. It's this sense of vulnerability and yet capable-ish at the same time. And their searching kind of begins like it did for my wallet in this sense. There's this initial preliminary check of the usual places, right? Oh, he's probably just with friends and family. We'll go check it out. And we don't know at what point Mary and Joseph realize it, but at some point they realize Jesus isn't there, which means he's in Jerusalem. And they leave the crowd behind and head for Jerusalem, which is a full day's journey away. Okay? So you have to book it for a day in order to even get to the spot where you can start looking for your kid. Okay? And then, so you can imagine, I'm sure the panic is setting in. And I like to imagine, for some reason, this moment for its humanness. What did that one day's journey look like with Mary and Joseph rolling back to Jerusalem? What was the marital situation like? I imagine, this is not in the scriptures, this is my imagination. I imagine Mary freaking out and Joseph being like, hey, calm down. He's 12. He's alone all the time. He's always by himself. And her saying like, yeah, alone in Nazareth, not in freaking Jerusalem, right? It would have been a very fun and interesting conversation to be able to fly on the wall for, right? A full day's journey. And I can imagine just the typical blame game starting, like, he was with you last. Why didn't you check to see if he was with us? And how could you have assumed that he was with the group? And how dull can you be? And then, like, how dull can I be? Like, you didn't realize he was gone either, right? It's just going to be this extreme back and forth. Where else did their minds go? No doubt their minds went to Jerusalem. They had a whole day to think about it. Teeming with pilgrims there for the Passover. All of the Jews that were scattered for the diaspora are now coming back and all descending on Jerusalem for this feast, for this high feast. This is the one you really had to be at as a Jew. And so, filled with all kinds of cultures and different types of pilgrims, and all the merchants that flood into the city because they're serving all the pilgrims and all the people that are there. Full of Roman soldiers, and certainly at that thought, how could you not go to the idea of the political and religious powers that had wanted to do Jesus harm when he was a baby? Right? Your mind's going, if Mary's an Enneagram 6, like, her mind is going to all of the possibilities, right? All of, whether you are or not, whether that's your makeup, that's the situation you would find yourself in, thinking about all the things that could go wrong. And it wasn't 30 minutes, it's 3 days. I wonder how they even slept, or if they even slept. Like, how do you go to sleep knowing that you've lost your child? And it almost, like, I love it for its humanness, but I also think it's comical, like somebody being like, oh, what'd you misplace? And be like, just the Son of God. Like, he was supposed to save us from our sins and deliver the world, but we lost track of him and left him behind on our family vacation, right? Kevin McAllister was only alone for 23 hours. Jesus had him beat by a good 49 hours. So picking up in verse 46, this is where it continues. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. So after 3 days of searching, they finally go to the temple and they find him. And probably are kicking themselves at this point. Like, why didn't you think to come to the temple first? Why didn't you think of going to the temple first? And maybe the blaming came later, but certainly at first a rush of relief and joy, right? Seeing that moment when Mary probably goes rushing to him to embrace him. And then we get this really good and extremely normal parental response. This is what she says, verse 48. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress. Right, so now the blame game shifts. She's not blaming Joseph, probably, anymore. She's not saying, we're so sorry we left you. She's like, what on earth were you thinking, young man? Do you have any idea what your father and I have been through? To which 12-year-old Jesus gives a gentle rebuke, verse 49, picking up here. And he said to them, why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. Such a funny and interesting little story for Luke to include in his gospel. A story about losing and finding Jesus. You find him sitting in a temple with the teachers, and not just any teachers, but the teachers of the teachers. And the teachers are amazed at his knowledge, and little 12-year-old Jesus is astonishing all of them. But interestingly enough, Luke doesn't make that the point of the story. Like, that's the point that I'm really curious about. Like, what was Jesus talking about with those teachers? Like, couldn't he have left us with that info? Like, what was he telling them? What questions was he asking? Why were they so amazed at this kind of prodigy child that was before them? But Luke doesn't leave us that information. Luke makes the whole point of the story about Mary and Joseph searching and finding, and then Jesus' response to their distress. They lose Jesus, assuming that he's with them, and they go looking for him only to find him in an unexpected way. And I think there's a pattern here, and it's a pattern that I want to focus on this morning. Because tucked away in this story is a beautiful picture of what I think the journey of following Jesus looks like. There's times in a spiritual journey where we can realize that we've misplaced Jesus. And it looks a lot like this account in Luke 2. Just want to go back to this portion of the passage where it says this. The boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. Do you catch the little pattern there? You can go to that next slide. Supposing him to be in the group, thinking that Jesus was with them, they moved on. There's something here for us to pay attention to. It's this occurrence of following Jesus and then assuming, supposing that he's there with you, and he's there with you and your group, only to turn around and realize that you've misplaced him. You've taken his presence for granted, supposed him to be with you. And then you get this nagging feeling. So then what do you do with that nagging feeling? You haven't seen him in a while, so maybe I'll go take a stroll. Maybe I'll go cruise through the group, see if I can find him. Only to find that his presence is gone. Maybe it's apathy. Maybe it's obliviousness. Maybe it's pride. Either way, we come to an awareness of his absence. How maybe we've gone on without him. And in a spiritual journey, this is a really difficult, painful, and terrifying place to find yourself. To realize that you've made assumptions, and then to turn around and realize that he isn't there. And then to take this at some level and put ourselves back in the story to realize that that same fear and terror that Mary and Joseph feel when they realize he's not there can be ours as well. To realize that we can't sense his presence, to go looking amongst all the familiar groups and the familiar locations only to find that he's no longer there. It's a terrifying place to be. St. John of the Cross called this the dark night of the soul. Maybe one way of describing it, which is an acute awareness of the lack of God's presence. Not a crisis of circumstance, but a spiritual crisis of absence, the apparent absence of God, whereby God is wooing us forward by seeming to disappear. And it's a painful place to be. So what do Mary and Joseph do? They go searching. And what do they find? They find a Jesus that they don't recognize. They had made assumptions of who Jesus was and where he'd be. And when they found him again, their idea of him gets shattered, forcing them to change and expand. He wasn't just their pubescent man-child. He was in his Father's house having conversations about covenants and sacrifices and prophecies and promises that are fulfilled. And their idea of him, or maybe another way of saying this, their image of him has to be shattered. It gets shattered. And it's not just here in Luke 2 that Mary loses him. At this point in the narrative, this is the last place we see Joseph show up. So we know that Joseph kind of disappears from the scene, but we get to trace Mary's story through the Gospels. And this isn't the only time that she loses Jesus. Think about the scene. It's recorded in Matthew and in Mark. Quite possibly the same occurrence that both of those gospel writers are talking about, where Jesus is in Capernaum in the early part of his ministry, and he's speaking to a bunch of people in a house, and people come to him and they say, "Hey, Jesus, your mom and your brothers are outside, and they're here to get you because they think you're crazy." And Jesus kind of responds with saying, like, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? Who are my sisters? Those who do the will of God. Mary and even the whole family unit at this point feeling like we're losing Jesus. We're losing the sense of who we thought Jesus was. We need to go gather him. We need to go get him and bring him back here. And Jesus, again, kind of shattering, destroying the image of what they had in mind of who he should be. Or now to let the family expand a little bit. Not just Mary and Jesus' siblings, but to his disciples. And what of the scene at Calvary? Losing Jesus again. And not just the idea of Jesus. Certainly their idea of Jesus dies. But Jesus himself dying. Jesus dies, and with him their ideas of who Jesus was. From the Gospels, this seems to be a necessary path of growth and discipleship. To lose Jesus, only to find him again. To lose our ideas of Jesus, only to find them challenged and reshaped. You can think about it. Think through any character that really comes close to Jesus. If it's the Pharisees, where Jesus is constantly messing, right, with their ideas and breaking down their ideas of who the Messiah would be. Or Peter, when Jesus says, I'm going to have to go on to Jerusalem and I'm going to have to die and be raised again. And Peter says, no, not on my watch. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Right? These really strong words shattering Peter's idea of who Jesus is and what he's going to be about. Craig Barnes puts it beautifully this way. He says this: the deep fear behind every loss is that we have been abandoned by the God who should have saved us. The transforming moment in Christian conversion comes when we realize that even God has left us. We then discover it was not God, but our image of God that abandoned us. Only then is change possible. It wasn't God, but our image of God that abandoned us. It isn't that we so much lose God, but rather our image of God. Not that we lose Jesus, but rather our image of Jesus. C.S. Lewis always puts it better than anybody else, so we'll listen to him. He says, images, I suppose, have their use. To me, however, their danger is more obvious. Images of the holy easily become holy images, sacrosanct. My idea of God is not a divine idea. It has to be shattered time after time. He shatters it himself. They must, like our incomplete, prejudiced, and generally inadequate ideas of others, be shattered in order for us to have any hope of contact with the real God. Not my idea of God, but God. And all this time I may once more be building with cards, and if I am, he will once more knock the building flat. He will knock it down as often as it proves necessary. It's a terrifying place to be on the precipice of feeling like you've lost your idea of who you thought God was. And yet it seems to be a necessary part of following Jesus. I realize a little bit, and this is always a problem, I guess, with sermons, but you can run the risk of oversimplifying things. But just stick with me for a minute here. I think there's kind of two paths when faced with this reality. You can do what Mary and Joseph do. You can, in trembling and in terror, admit that you've misplaced him and go looking. And I want to talk about what that looks like here in a minute, because I think It is the path of discipleship, and we can find great encouragement here. But for 1 minute, I just want to point out possibly a more dangerous path or option. The other path, the great danger, is to be so sure that he's with us that we never realize we've gone on without him. The great danger, let me say that again, is to be so sure he's with us that we never realize we've gone on without him. That we never even think to leave the comfort of our place to go looking for him. We've dug into our position so hard that we don't even realize he's not with us. And I think in many ways, this is far worse than the dark night of the soul. Because it's such a prideful place to be. And you may not even realize this is where you are because your sensitivity is shut down. You don't even realize his absence. Could you imagine if Mary and Joseph had never realized they lost Jesus, right? Or to live in a place of denial. And yet this is a real temptation for us to close our eyes to the reality. It's way worse than just apathy and obliviousness. It's more hard-hearted and prideful, I think. So what does this look like? What does this actually look like, boots on the ground? This is what I think it looks like. It looks like the assertion that you have Jesus figured out, or that you have control of him, or that you have the corner on the Jesus market, so to speak, that you don't have anything left to learn, that you claim that Jesus is with your group, is a dangerous thing to say God is on our side. Anyone who says that probably doesn't know God very well. Jesus is with me and all the Republicans. Jesus is with me and all the Democrats. Jesus is with the progressives. He's with the conservatives. Jesus is here with the KJV onlyers. Jesus is here with the deconstructionists. Jesus is here with the reformers and the traditionalists. Jesus is here with the charismatics. Jesus is here at Union Chapel. We've got him figured out. This is where we're doing it right. We have it figured out. It's a dangerous place to be. Let me ask you a question real quick. If you're a coach, what kind of player you want to have on your team? You have two options. You can have a decent player that's sure they're God's gift to the sport and is sure they can coach the team better than you. Or do you want a substandard player that knows their own shortcomings and is willing to put in the work to grow and transform to be a better player? Like, I'd take the substandard player every day. And if you've been a coach, you would say the same. I'll take something that I can actually work with. Which reminds me of the parable that Jesus tells about the soil. Right? On one extreme is this hard soil that nothing can penetrate. It's completely hardened. And so when the opportunity to cultivate life drops on it, it loses its opportunity. It loses its chance to change and grow and transform anything. But the soft and receptive soil makes a good home for the seed to germinate. If we have perfect control of him, if there's nothing left to understand, might it be possible that Jesus was describing our hearts when he was talking about the hard soil? Is it possible that our hearts are hardened to the growth that God wants to see in us? Is it possible we're unwilling to let our image or idea of God be shattered by God? Is it possible that we're unwilling to seek and find him? This is what I think spiritual stagnation looks like. So as terrifying as this dark night looks, we can hunker down over here in fear of change or of anything else, and it can keep us from where God might want us to go. And there's a whole bunch of other dangers, misrepresenting who God is over here. And so the challenge here is to first have eyes to see. Have eyes to see God. Is this where you have me? Is this where I am? Is this my heart? Is this the state of my heart? And then if it is, to repent. or if that word bothers you, to let go. Let go of the control. Let go of the pride and the ego. Let go of the allegiance to the idol you've fashioned with your own hands. Soften the soil. Pray for soft soil. Let God come in and dig it up. So that's one path. The other option, the way of discipleship, the way of Mary and Joseph, is to go searching for Jesus. But what does this look like? I want to return to this quote real quick, that Craig Barnes quote that we were at. This is just a portion of that. Remember where he said this: "The transforming moment in Christian conversion comes when we realize that even God has left us. We then discover it was not God, but our image of God that abandoned us." Now look at what little 12-year-old Jesus says to Mary when she comes and is like, "I can't believe that you would do this to us." What does Jesus say to her? He says this: "Why were you looking for me?" Which is kind of like, feels right on the verge of like little 12-year-old Jesus mouthing off, right? To Mary. Like, "Are you kidding me? Why were we looking for you? Because you weren't with us? Because we were gone we didn't have you in our presence for 3 whole days and something terrible could have happened to you? What do you mean, why were we looking for you?" But what is Jesus saying in this? He says it in the next line. Why were you looking for me? I was right where I was supposed to be. This is really harsh truth, a really difficult thing, and then we realize the whole thing just gets kind of shifted and turned on us. This is Jesus saying, I wasn't the lost one. You were. I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. Where were you? We sang it in Abide With Me, right? I've often left you, though you've never left me. Right? We're the ones who wander off. Jesus is staying exactly where he's supposed to be. I wasn't the lost one, you were. And what does Jesus do with lost things? This is where the encouragement comes. What does Jesus do with lost things? He goes and finds them. Especially the ones that are looking for him. He goes and finds them. All right, one other place I want to park, and then we'll wrap it up here. Fast forward to the end of Luke's gospel. So this is Luke 2. Let's fast forward Luke 24. It's a familiar story. 2 of Jesus' disciples walking down the road. You can hold on 1 second on this. Walking down the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus. Jesus has been crucified. They are devastated. Jesus is dead. Jesus appears to the 2 disciples on the road, and they don't recognize him. Here they are, dejected, experiencing their dark night of the soul, right? Their hopes and dreams of who Jesus was as they watched him broken, bloody, drained of all life, defeated, hung on a cross, and then buried in a tomb. Their Messiah was dead, and the idea of their Messiah was dead, gone. And where is Jesus? He finds them on the road. But they don't recognize him. And he draws out what? He draws out their sad story. Tell me, what's going on? And then after they've told him their sad story, he says this. You can put that passage up now. He says, "O foolish ones and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets had spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself." It's almost the same exact answer he gives Mary. Foolish ones, didn't you realize it was necessary? I was where I was supposed to be. You just didn't think that's where I was supposed to be. I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. It's actually the same exact Greek word, necessary. It's the same one that we find in Luke chapter 2. I was never lost. I was right here. I was never about fitting in your box. I was busy about my Father's work. So a couple things. Where do we go from here? What do we do with this? What do we do with this idea? And I want to speak to a couple different places here. The first thing I would say, and maybe not all of this is necessarily going to apply to you, and that's okay. And you can take it or leave it. These are some of my observations. What do we do in the face of this reality? The first thing I would say is this. You can go to that first one on the list. Don't despair. If this is where you find yourself right now, you're in good company. If you find yourself in this place of being painfully aware of the lack of Jesus' presence in your life, and you have the gut feeling that maybe you've gone on without him, that you've misplaced him, it's okay. Don't despair. You're in good company. What do I mean by that? Well, read a couple autobiographies of great Christians. Read about Mother Teresa or C.S. Lewis or Martin Luther or Thomas Merton. Read about each one of these profound people describing this process of losing and refining Jesus in their spiritual journey, and of it actually being the place of transformation and growth, the same one that guy in the quote is talking about. It was the impetus, it was the place where God met them. So don't despair. You're in good company. Don't be afraid of the journey of the dark night. Don't be afraid to face the absence. Don't be afraid of the questions, afraid of the wanderings, afraid of the doubt. Jesus is faithful to meet us in our long, despairing walks. He's faithful to find us in our lostness. He's faithful to surprise us and lead us into new green pastures. The new year is an opportunity to take stock, to ask the question, am I sensitive to God's presence? And if I am I even awake enough to know if he is gone? If this is where you find yourself, don't despair. Second, lean into the story. Let Jesus challenge your image of Jesus. This is really key here, right? Because I realize that some of what I'm saying right now can probably sound a little new agey mumbo jumbo, okay? Like, just go find your inner happy place, right? Just deconstruct your image of Jesus. You need to go find a new one. No. What does Jesus do to destroy the disciples' idea of what they thought the Messiah should be? What does he do? This is so important for us. He opens the scriptures to him and he says, look, starting with Moses, that means from Genesis 1:1. Starting there, he walked them through the entire story to show him where he was, how it was necessary for him to do all the things that he did. And so this is what I want to say. You don't need to let Deepak Chopra challenge your idea of Jesus. Let Jesus challenge your idea of Jesus. Go back to God's word. If you're frustrated, if you're lost, if you can't find him, if you don't like him, go back to the scriptures. Go back and let Jesus do the work of telling you who he is. And I'm saying this to the believer who's walked the long road, and I'm saying this to the person who's not even sure. Right? We've said this as a church for a long time, that maybe the good news to Vancouver, Washington, is that Jesus isn't who you think he is. You have an idea of who Jesus is, and that's not him. There's good news to be found, so lean into the story. Third, it takes time and space, so make it. Make space for reflection and meditation. This is what I think is really fascinating, and it's easy to not catch. Luke's really clear in saying Mary and Joseph were astounded, and they didn't understand what Jesus was saying. But then what does he end with? But Mary treasured these things in her heart. So let's get this straight for a second, this really frantic and traumatic and very difficult experience that could define your life in some ways. We lost our child for 3 days in the largest city in our country. Right? That becomes something that she treasures. She treasures whatever that was for her. And she treasures what he says to her when she comes back. She replays them. She holds them as precious words that she replays in her ears. I wonder if that's what she thought when she saw her son hanging from a cross. If she heard those words that she treasured somewhere down in there. Why are you looking for me? I'm about my Father's business. So it takes time, and we got to slow down. We got to slow down enough to hear what Jesus is saying. We got to slow down to let Jesus challenge. And this idea of Mary treasuring in her heart this experience of losing and finding Jesus anew, and we watch her faithfully follow that pattern, right? She follows Jesus all the way, challenge through challenge, all the way to the end. It doesn't come quickly. It's perpetual work. Lastly, and this is where I'd end. Don't go alone. The community is a gift, so don't neglect it. I don't think it's strange that Mary and Joseph are this pair together. And then when we get to the end of Luke, there's a pair walking along the road. In this dark night, isolation is not your friend. So find a friend. Loneliness is a disease of our culture. And we go around in fear and anxiety thinking, they don't need a friend. I need a friend, but nobody else needs a friend. Bull. They're lonely. They're there. They're out there. So ask them. Maybe searching for Jesus means searching for a friend. To find a friend to say, will you go with me as I go looking for Jesus? Somebody to partner with, to journey, to share your sad story, to talk about Jesus, to go looking together. What am I telling you? I'm telling you, use the buddy system. And maybe don't look just for a clone of yourself. Because there's great diversity in our community. And I realize when I say that, maybe not as ethnically or racially diverse as we'd want to be. But there is certainly a diversity in thought. And this shouldn't scare us or cause us to back away from each other, but be a place where we can sharpen each other. To let other people be the mechanism with which God breaks down our house of cards in order to build us back up again. Lean into the community. Don't walk away from it. All right. I took too long. Thanks for sticking with me. So we come to this table every single week. And this is what was running through my mind. The disciples that Jesus was walking with at Emmaus, he talks to them the whole time. And they don't realize it's him. And they invite him to come and stay with them. And the passage says, when he broke the bread, they realized who he was. And then he disappears, vanishes from their sight. And they look at each other and they're like, oh, he was with us. He was with us the whole time, and we're not our hearts burning within us as he talked to us on the road. I think it's really interesting as it relates to this story. It's in the breaking of the bread that they find him. It's in the breaking of it. So my encouragement to you is not to run away from the breaking. To not run away from the shattering, but to lean into it, because in the breaking is where we find him. In his body broken for us, his blood poured out for us, for the forgiveness of sins and the redemption of the world. Amen? All right. Let's pray. Jesus, who goes looking for lost things, would you come and find us again? May we find you here now in the breaking of this bread. in your blood poured out for us. Amen.
I invite you to stand. The people in the back corner that would love to pray with you, pray for you, pray over you. Let's worship together.